This is gonna be the dumbest video I've ever made. So last October, I made a FNAF retrospective of the whole series up to that point, minus Fazbear Frights, in honor of the movie coming out. But I wanted to do something special for the 10th anniversary. And since 2024 was also the year MatPat retired, I figured, why not just make a massive tier list ranking every single one of them? It's hard to imagine either of them without the other, you know, it's kind of a yin and yang situation. I spent 2 weeks straight watching nothing but this.
Hello, Internet!
And let me tell you, by the time we got to like the 50 range, it was so much brain rot. My entire YouTube feed is now nothing but Five Nights at Freddy's, so that's pretty cool. So here's how this is gonna work. There are 70 total theories that he did. I forgot to add a tier, just give me a sec. All right, so we're gonna be counting pretty much every game theory, and then the 4 ones that he did on film theory. I'm not including any of the food theory ones, mainly because I just kind of forgot about them, and also 70 is a nice number. And I'm not counting Five Nights at Freddy's 3 Part 2 second half as a distinct theory. That's a part of the first half, because it would have been one video if it wasn't for the copyright strike that's mentioned at the end of the video. So just keep in mind that I'm doing it like that, okay? We got a lot to get through, so let's just get started with The Scariest Monster Is You. This one is a really interesting look at like the earliest days of the thing, right? As the last game that Scott was ever gonna make, obviously he didn't have plans for like Remnant and whatnot. That's all stuff that he came up with later. So at this point, you've got the Bite of 87, Missing Children's Incident, and Golden Freddy. That's are like the big ones. And I think that this theory does an admirable job at kind of exploring that stuff. I do think the one thing that really holds it back is tying it back to a real life string of murders. That was a little stretch, you know, it's a little stretch. It's an interesting coincidence, but some of the things that he tries to use to tie it back are kind of shaky, especially the character comparisons, like Foxy and the manager. Why? Because Foxy, he's like a pirate or something, and he's behind a curtain. And then Freddy's especially, like, Freddy's in the girl bathroom, and one of the victims was a girl. Bam, that's a connection right there. I'm thinking B tier for this one. I think that's reasonable. All right, FNAF 2, gaming's scariest story solved. This one is a big deal. This is like very foundational stuff. Looking back on it now, it's basically just a recap of this game's role in the series. It doesn't even feel like a theory anymore. It's just fact, and it was confirmed as such like a year later, I think. The only thing that he got wrong was phone guy being purple guy, and I have thoughts on that, but I'll get into it with the next theory where it's actually relevant. But yeah, I don't think I'll have any pushback to putting that one in S tier. FNAF Mystery Solved Part 1. Now, this is an interesting one. This is one of the few multi-part ones he did. I kind of want to put it in S tier, but the second part does lower it a bit. So yeah, I'm gonna put it in A tier because it would be S tier, but part 2 kind of brings it down. We'll get into that. But yeah, it's very similar to the previous one, right? This is very foundational stuff. This is the only thing that challenges this later on is that what if it was never real? But other than that, like, yeah, this is cream of the crop good stuff. I don't really have much to say about it. So then we get to the FNAF Mystery Solved Part 2. I don't like this one. The whole thing is just full of contradictions. He doesn't take into account that different regions use different calendar systems. So if you were in a part of the globe in the southern hemisphere, where it was day, month, year, then it would be December 11th, not November 12th, which would be a summer month. So that's not really a good point to prove that, you know, when you're playing FNAF 2, it takes place like earlier or whatever. But that's not even the big one. That's just a funny little thing I wanted to point out. He contradicts what he says in part 1, where he says that 3 takes place in a previous location, but then in part 2, he says that it takes place in the FNAF 1 location, which is verifiably false considering that they look completely different from one another, layout-wise. And then, of course, you got the phone guy. You know, this is an iconic theory. Now, 2 I don't really think it's that big of a deal because it doesn't really contradict anything that we're shown, but it does contradict a lot of information for him to be Purple Guy in this game, because we see what actually happens to Purple Guy, and he dies in a completely separate place than Phone Guy. And I thought it was interesting because the reason I think that this even was a theory was because the idea that Purple Guy was someone that we don't know, like that's just that's not. It has to be someone we met. The most prominent character that we meet is Phone Guy. So therefore, I think that's the line of logic that he was using, right? He's the most prominent character, and therefore it makes the most, it's the most satisfying in a sense. And, I do think that Purple Guy was a solvable mystery before Silver Eyes released, because, there is a lot of evidence that lines up for it, right? These incidents always seem to happen whenever a new restaurant opens up. And, who would be there for restaurants opening? An owner of some sort. For some reason, no one ever thought that, though. And at this point, the most logical one you could say was that it's the previous guard, who isn't Phone Guy. I feel like that's the most logical pick. Yeah, that's just kind of my thoughts. I don't really like it that much. He contradicts stuff, doesn't really fully look into stuff, kind of mid. Our first D tier. FNAF 4 got it all wrong. This one's an interesting one because, scientifically, he does go into scientifically why he can't be the Bite of 87 victim. So I guess in that sense, he is right, but he doesn't look into a lot of the evidence that we're given. Like, I feel like the idea that it was the Bite of 87 is such a weird thing because we clearly see that in 1987, it was the FNAF 2 location, and this is a location from before that. So I'm not really sure why anyone ever thought that it was the Bite of 87 unless it was like a massive retcon, but no one ever really, thought about that during this debate. Yeah, I don't really have much to say about it. It's a B tier. Why FNAF will never end. This one, this is an interesting one. It's kind of weird how confident he is in the whole puppet thing, because the clear solution at this point is that he's Golden Freddy, right? The puppet evidence is very superficial. Some of it isn't even strictly tied to the puppet, while the Golden Freddy evidence, which he somehow says is weaker, honestly, I think is a lot stronger for why it makes more sense for Crying Child to be Golden Freddy than the puppet. Because, the puppet didn't even exist at this point. He isn't anywhere near here. The whole thing's, it's a bit of a mess, But yeah, the main point of the video really is just, hey, there is no way to fully solve it. It's mainly how you choose to interpret the evidence, which, the further this monstrosity chugs along, yeah, you definitely feel that sentiment. Feeling a solid B tier once again. All right, so FNAF, the clue that solves Five Nights at Freddy's. I'm gonna be real with you. This is one of the least mid-dream theories I've ever seen. He brings up the exact reason I don't really like them in the video itself. They are really convenient and unsatisfying, inconsistency here, well, it's not real, so who cares? So the video is less trying to prove that everything is a dream and more trying to prove that it was Scott's intention that it's a dream. And I think that he makes a pretty compelling case, especially with the grandfather clock and toy animatronics. Those are good, compelling stuff. Can't quite put it in S tier, but yeah, A tier, it's pretty close. FNAF, 4 games, 1 story. Specifically the theory section, that's like the first 20 minutes of the video or something, because it was a live stream back in the day. This one I feel is kind of like one of the most forgotten ones because, the majority of the video is a live stream, oops. But yeah, we're not including the live stream because I did not watch that. I just skipped straight to the next one. Oh my gosh, this is why you don't drink a bunch of coffee right before recording. It just destroys your vocal cords. Goodness gracious. I think that this is a solid little look at everything, from the lens that it's not a dream. And I think that it's a nice companion piece because the dream theory is mainly focused on the individual nights, right? Not any of the 8-bit mini games or any of the story that was hidden. And so this one's kind of like that companion keys. Jeez, I got the Zelda on the brain apparently. But yeah, I like this one. I think it's actually. Why do I keep bumping the stupid cord? But anyways, A tier. I should probably read my notes before waffling on more. Okay. FNAF Sister Location Decoded. So this one, I think, I could be wrong, but I think this one has like the worst audio mixing in the whole thing. Like it's almost as bad as my Breath of the Wild video. This one's kind of hard to place because in a lot of ways, most of the stuff in the source code doesn't really have an effect on the game. Them being experimented on is like, there's really nothing in the game that suggests that. I mean, maybe in the future books, there's a bit of a case you could make, but within the game itself, not really. But I will say, I'm gonna slap it in S tier, or I don't really care. Probably the most controversial pick right there, because number one, the Afton, but the main one is the absolute baseless claim that he makes at the end of the video that ends up being like 90% right. You know, with the whole sister location and baby. Like genuinely, the only real thing that's wrong is Pigtail Girl. But other than that, it's pretty spot on. So S tier. Follow the eyes. It's funny how at the beginning he calls out the overly convoluted nature of the series. Which, you know, looking at it from this point, you know, hindsight, that's nothing. That's nothing. It is so easy to comprehend and understand. It's ridiculous. Now, given that Michael Afton didn't exist at this point, at least that we knew of, I will give him this one on saying that it's William Afton that you're playing as. And this does start a little bit of a trend that you're going to see going forward that I don't personally have that big of a problem with it for the most part, but this is one of the few times, right? I think he relies a little bit too much on the books here. And I'm not going to say that too often because in general, I think he does a pretty good job with the books and stuff, but there are a few times where it just goes a little overboard, and this is one of those times, I think. So I'm going to put it in B tier. The Killer's Promise. It's interesting how he uses what the Silver Eyes was foreshadowing for the next two books and kind of applies that to Sister Location. I'm not really sure if that was Scott's intention at the time, but, you know, it's just kind of interesting, you know? As the beginnings of a lot of foundational stuff for the current consensus of the series, I think that this one deserves a fairly high rating, even if it does also rely a bit too much on Silver Eyes. And here's the thing, I was taking notes on these as I was watching them, and I kind of changed my mind a little bit. I don't think it's like a super massive over-reliance, but I do think it's a little bit, you know, it's a bit of a stretch for what's in the game versus what we can infer from the book. Yeah, there's not a super strong connection at this point, but, you know, regardless, I think that's a good A tier. I think it's a good A tier. We were wrong about the bite. It's kind of weird that it took a science theory to make him think that Afton was always a psychopath, but whatever. Not much to say. I think it's a B tier. The answer was right in front of us. This is our first C tier. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I feel like this one has way too much of a reliance on the Twisted Ones. He doesn't really bring enough evidence outside of Sister Location to tie it into the games. The mind control discs are never even show up in future theories, at least not for a really long time, and even then it's very small, you know, like, you know, blink and you miss it kind of references and whatnot. So I don't know, man. I don't know. All right, so now we're getting to a really funny one. The final theory. It's weird that he waits until the end in a sped up section to give evidence for certain timeline placements, which I know he does kind of do with the Ultimate Timeline years later, but it's different there because he says at the start, hey, we're going to have a more narrative focus, and then I will talk about why we made certain decisions, and said that that's what happened and all that, which, you know, because he's very upfront about it, it's a little different. But, you know, here it's a B tier. It's a B tier. All right, so then you got the final theory part 2. This one is kind of funny, right? Because it's very shortly
before
Pizzeria Simulator would come out. And he says that everyone's story is complete when very clearly they aren't. You know, Springtrap is still out at large. What's Michael Afton's deal, right? Like, he still hasn't found his father. There isn't any closure, but he says that there is, and it's kind of weird, I'm not gonna lie. However, as far as pre-Pizzeria Simulator timelines go, I think it's pretty solid, and I think that this part is a little bit better than the previous one, so we're gonna slap it in A tier. FNAF 6, No More Secrets. So this one is a solid introduction to the Pizzeria Simulator era of theories. Though it's not really that interesting, honestly. It's so not interesting that I don't have any notes on it. I don't really even remember what it was, because this was like a week ago at this point that I watched it. But yeah, apparently it's an A tier according to my notes, so I'm gonna trust it. What was in the box? This one is probably not accurate, but I don't care because I think it's a really satisfying explanation of what was in the box and how it changed a few times and like what the true meaning of the box was, you know, all that stuff. I think this one is deserving of an S tier. I really like that one. It's pretty good. And to this day, I still kind of have it as my headcanon, so sue me. FNAF stumped me. There's nothing particularly noteworthy about this one. I guess it's kind of interesting going through his thought process while trying to solve Golden Freddy's name, but it's not really that memorable outside of that. So I'm thinking B tier, because you know, it's not bad. The theory that changed everything. So this one starts a weird era. I think it's like my second least favorite prior to Security Breach, which, oh yeah, we're going to get to that one later. But basically, he interprets that Michael Afton is the crying child and that he's also a robot, which this is the beginning of Person is Robot. And honestly, we'll you know what, actually, we'll wait till we get later on in the video for me to get my thoughts on that one. That whole saga, because oh boy, it's more relevant there. The biggest problem with this is that he doesn't bring up that there's actually a third character in the logbook, which is altered text. And altered text directly responds to what faded text says. So there's 3 characters within the book, and he never acknowledges that third one. And so it's only those 2, which therefore, yeah. And if there were those 2, then he would be right, and I would, you know, place it higher. But because he doesn't, yeah, because of that, I have to put it in C tier. We were right all along. This is just a really good little theory on Ultimate Custom Night. It's pretty good. I think it's S tier. It's pretty good. I like it. And it's gonna be the last S tier of for a while. So don't worry if you think I'm putting too many in there or whatever. Cause yeah, we ain't getting another one for a while. But yeah, it's a good analysis of Ultimate Custom Night and what it is. And I mean, like, no one's really challenged it. So the final timeline. The gender thing that he uses for Golden Freddy is genuinely cope, and whether or not Cassidy was a girl or a boy doesn't actually matter to the overall story. It could go either way. The use of Michael Afton as the crying child does hinder a bit of the timeline's accuracy, but otherwise I think it's the solid beginnings of a timeline, you know what I'm saying? I'm thinking A tier. This is the end. The starting part of this theory is reliant on ignoring altered text from the logbook, and I don't like how it undermines the actual good theory that he had on the box. It's an unfortunate low spot in what's otherwise a solid timeline, so because of that low spot, unfortunate B tier. FNAF 7, The Untold Story of Sister Location. He has this weird passive-aggressive tone at the start of the video, and there's like little trickles of it throughout, and I don't know, I just makes it a little annoying to watch at points. It's kind of funny that he thinks it takes place around FNAF 2 and that you're playing as a technician, which, you know, if he's looking at the sequel, then he'd be right. You know, you are playing as a technician in that one, but you're not, so it's off the mark and stuff. My brain is dying, sorry. I've kind of had to record this multiple times because my brain dead and dumb. C tier. To be fair, I think Help Wanted was going to be very difficult to actually predict at this point because it's an in-universe game and you're playing as a beta tester. Like, who's going to even think about that prior to release? The FNAF 7 oopsie, Scott's problem with fan art. This is not really a theory, so we're gonna plunk it in this special tier right here, real world. So yeah, if you're, in case you were wondering what the heck that was all about, well, now you know. I will say though, it's pretty based on him for taking responsibility for how he's handled fan art in the past. That's pretty based. You were meant to lose. This one is really forgettable. I don't really have any notes on it other than it's fine. You know, there's nothing bad about it, but there's really nothing stand out about it, right? It's just kind of a, yeah, here, you know, there's no winning and stuff. Here's Glitchtrap, blah, 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 B tier. The monster we missed. I kind of like this one. It's a really nice change of pace. It never goes anywhere. This is the only time that he really breaks and kind of comes at the series with a different angle. You know, what if instead of following Afton, we're following Henry and his family? I think that's kind of cool. And I wish he did more stuff like that during his tenure as host. But yeah, this is it's a pretty cool one. Easy A tier. FNAF just got a reboot. This one has too much of a reliance on FNAF World at the beginning. And outside of that, it's the least interesting prediction that he ever made. There is genuinely nothing to latch onto outside of FNAF World, and it doesn't help that the first 7 minutes are spent overly explaining an Easter egg that could have been explained in a seventh of the time. Yeah, D tier. The Cult of Glitchtrap. The only real noteworthy thing about this theory is the depression of how horrifically underused Vanny ended up being. Otherwise, it's accurate, but once again, it's not really that memorable. Why do I keep pushing the C tier? So up to this point, you know, we've had, you know, a nice little, look at that. It's a nice bell curve, a little top heavy, but it's pretty solid thus far. This is the part where we're going to start filling in these lower tiers, because now we're entering the Fazbear Frights era of the theory crafting. Honestly, this section right here, it was a slog to get through. Everything between Into the Pits release and Security Breach is just, oh boy, I would not recommend cramming that in like a 3 or 4 day time period, because it was rough. But as the first Fazbear Frights theory, I think this one is solid. You know, he does a good job explaining how it does relate to the games in 1985 and a few of the wrinkles that arise from it. It's solid, right? I think a B tier's good for it. The Faceless Puppet Master. The title doesn't really fit with what the theory actually is, and it's quite flimsy with a ton of evidence you have to really squint at to make it work. I don't hate it, but don't really like it either. It's C tier. The Grave Robbers. What will likely end up being a recurring theme with most of the Fazbear Frights theories is that they're mid. There's nothing that interesting or memorable about this one. It is elevated with a good explanation of why he uses the books for stuff, you know, which is sadly a point that he has to reiterate over and over again until eventually he just makes an entire video talking about it. But yeah, I agree 100% that using the book to interpret the games and whatnot is the correct move. But anyways, yeah, C tier. FNAF 4, The Body Snatchers. This is a pretty good theory, in my opinion. I think that he does make a compelling case for psychic friend Fredbear to be a lonely Freddy. It doesn't really change too much of the lore as we know it, but it's just kind of a nice, fun little detail. So, A tier. Golden Freddy, not what we thought. Strange that this is the origin of the Golden Freddy being possessed by two spirits thing. You know, I thought it would have been the Stitch Wraith stuff, but no, it's this one, and it is so flimsy. There's like no evidence that he uses, just, the kid is, he's in there when the spring locks go off, blah, blah, blah. And then they see someone who doesn't even look like the kid. Oh, wow, like, that's it. And then the guy who's in the suit, he's not even tied to the suit at the end, and that's it. And honestly, though, it's like he makes a compelling case later on, and this is the origin? That's weird. Anyway, C tier. Your pain fuels us. This one right here is just a summary of the stories that are in the book. and then a few threads that don't really go anywhere. Yeah, D tier. FNAF, another mystery solved. This is the blessed theory that finally ends the Michael Afton is Crying Child saga. The evidence that he uses is a little flimsy, how he ties the books into it, but I don't care because it's over. It's finally done. You know what I'm saying? Now, he still doesn't bring up alter text. Whatever, though. It's fine. It's whatever. Now, outside of finally ending the whole Michael is Crying Child thing, it's basically the same as the other Fazbear Frights theories, but I'm going to put it in B tier for killing it once and for all. So there you go. We solved Golden Freddy. This one right here is the one where he finally brings up altered text. This is one of the better uses of Fazbear Frights tying it to the games because it's a reinforcement of an idea, right? Jake and Andrew in the Stitch Wraith story reflect Cassidy and Crying Child within the games, right? Like that's some nice strengthening idea, supporting stuff. And then you look at the alter text and stuff. That's some good stuff. I'm putting it in A tier, right? FNAF security breach. I know the big twist, I think. I like the idea that the Atari-style minigames are what the indie developer made, a lot more than the main games. And honestly, there is a part of me that still kind of headcanons that. And we'll get into some of that later on once we get to security breach, because I got some thoughts. Now, like a lot of the other Fazbear Frights theories, it does tend to feel a lot more like a recap more than anything else. And it also reminds me of how underutilized Vanny ended up being, which depresses me. So, unfortunately, we're gonna have to put it in B tier. FNAF, the new breed. This is a real-world theory. Woo, yeah, baby. But yeah, it's just a little look at the Fazbear fan game initiative and all that stuff. It's pretty cool, pretty cool. Did Reddit just solve FNAF? This one is fine. I don't quite see how the real Jake ties into Crying Child's name being Evan. Yeah, I do kind of like how he kind of calls out confirmation bias, like we start with an endpoint, how do we get to endpoint instead of trying to add everything up? Some good stuff, Yeah, that's pretty much everything the video offers C tier. 3 new FNAF security breach theories. This one is elevated quite a bit by the, editing framing device. That alone was making me thinking of putting it in like B tier, but really that's the biggest thing that the video offers. Yeah, it's kind of just the same as a lot of these other ones. So he's half right on the hiding inside animatronics thing, but instead of hiding in multiple, you just destroy them and then take their parts to open that stuff. So, half right, we'll give him a point there. The Glamrock Chica being a reskinned Toy Chica is quite funny when you really think about it, because it could just be a callback, which, is going to be something we get to with security breach, superficial details, maybe just being a symbolic thing or whatever and not the literal. But again, we'll get to that when we get to security breach, okay? It's fine. The second theory is obviously wrong, and it falls into the same category as a lot of the other Fazbear Frights theories, and the same for the third one. So it's overall pretty weak. C tier, but again, that framing device of just the different editing styles throughout the years, it's a close one to putting it there, but unfortunately not. FNAF, Return to the Pit. I did not take any notes for this one, so I just kind of threw a tier on it. It is basically the same thing that I've kind of been saying about a lot of the Fazbear Frights theories. It's just basic recaps with a few threads here and there. Apparently this one's D tier, so that's pretty cool. We need to talk about FNAF. There's a wise saying that goes, there are 3 things you don't talk about: religion, politics, and sports. So I am going to heed that wisdom and just put it in real world tier and move on. 3 new FNAF timeline theories. The intro is accurate. I don't remember it because this was so long ago, yeah, let's just go through these. The Chica theory doesn't have much to do with anything, but it is kind of neat for world building purposes. Otherwise, there's not much there. Same goes for Balloon Boy. Some of the evidence doesn't have much to do with him. And then William Afton being a stepdad also doesn't really add anything either. But hey, I got some neat stuff in there, so it's not a D tier, it's C tier, you know what I'm saying? FNAF Goodbye Father. The tentacles being baby isn't technically wrong. Baby returning would have been equally as bad as Afton having returned in the game, so it's not like I can really say that it's, dumb or whatever. He's also not too far off with a pizzeria being buried underneath the Pizzaplex. It's just the most recent one as opposed to the first one, like he suggests. He's like a quarter correct with this one, thus making it the best security breach prediction of them all. B tier. All right, so now we're getting to the security breach theories. Let me just get this out of the way right now. I don't really like a lot of his security breach stuff. And you might have seen, right, I don't really like some of the Fazbear Frights stuff, but like security breach especially. And the reason for that is because I just don't like the narrative of the Steel Wool era of the series. I don't like the whole indie developer making games and then they're like the actual games, so they exist in universe. Which, also begs the question, like, why would their brilliant PR move be to take these games that were already damaging their PR, their brand, and then just making it more immersive, because they are like one-to-one, the exact same mechanics and everything, but, now in VR. So, like, what purpose does that serve genuinely? And I don't like how there's always looking to the past and the future.
And it's, more so than any other installment, feels like an inflection point. A game that is simultaneously looking back to pay tribute to where these games began, as well as a game that's looking forward to lay the groundwork for where this franchise is headed.
Stuff that looks both backwards at the series that came before and forwards into what is coming next.
Ooh, what's the future for the series? And it's always clear as mud, and it just confuses the past and all that. The story is just not interesting. And there are parts that I like. I kind of like the more, leaning more into the sci-fi stuff. Looking at a lot of Scott's earlier stuff, it definitely fits a lot more with that, just a little tinge of horror here and there. But for the most part, it's kind of a sci-fi series. And I like certain concepts like Remnant and Agony and that, and whatnot. But like the story itself, it's clinging onto the past, but trying to do it in a way that's really confusing and just makes things overly convoluted, overly messy. And, like, when you look at the individual stories, they're not interesting, right? It's, a boring creepypasta and Help Wanted, and then in Security Breach, it's just, it's a real mess. And then when you throw in all the secrets and the lore, it's like, what's even the point? It's not fun anymore, With Help Wanted 2 and Ruin, I do think it's starting to drift back into being kind of fun again. But like, yeah, the story, I just don't like it. And the theories we're about to go over are exemplary of that fact, right? You cannot really get any good theories out of this because the story itself just isn't good. So with all that being said, FNAF don't trust Gregory. This is the origin of when the X character's robot got really bad. Specifically the reaction to it. Now, I personally do not hate the idea of Gregory being a robot. I think it's mainly how he comes to that conclusion is a little shaky because there's not a ton actually tying him to some of the stuff. But the main one that I strongly disagree with is that Gregory is the robot, crying child. Now, here's what I will say. I think that all of the connections that he draws to the crying child are accurate, and I do think they're intentional. But I think it's more symbolically representing the crying child, where the crying child, he never overcame his fear and he, succumbed to a horrible fate. You have this new child who does overcome that, right? That kind of stuff. He's taking a bite out of Fredbear's head and all that. It's not literal, and I think that's the main thing, right? He's making it literal. But you can't really blame him because the entire thing is about, here's character you thought story was over. Actually, it's not. It just continues. Why? Because I said so. And, the thumbnail's accurate. They're all Afton. Why is it because they're all Afton? Because that's what the game is telling him, right? Thematically, the game is just telling him that it is Afton. I don't agree with that. I think it's more a thematic, symbolic representation of all this stuff. I don't think it's meant to be literal. But you can't really blame him for looking at it literally. So with all that said, yeah, D tier. I don't really like it that much. The secret Afton, this is more just doubling down on Gregory being a robot and all that stuff. Don't have a problem with the robot angle. It's more the crying child angle and the Michael Afton angle and the Elizabeth Afton angle. And that is pretty much what it is. Honestly, I think Vanessa being baby is way worse than anything else. D tier. Is Golden Freddy really in Security Breach? This one's actually not bad. I for the most part, I actually kind of like this one. I don't fully agree with it, but I think how he ties it into the overall story of the game and everything, I think it's pretty good. I'm thinking B tier for this one. Even though the princess in Princess Quest is Vanessa, the clue that almost solves everything. He was spot on with his comments on the retconning at the start of the video. I think it's pretty clear that the original plan was for the burn trap ending to be the canon ending. And then they changed their mind to Princess Quest when they realized, hey, wait, that's stupid. Regardless, this one isn't as bad as the first two, even though it still kind of goes into that stuff. I do actually like the idea of Gregory being patient 46. You know, that's just me, though. Although, once again, the clues here to suggest that he's literally the crying child still feel like a stretch. It's the same for Michael Afton and all that stuff. And for the sake of fairness, let's ignore the fact that the mimic exists and fits the criteria that he assigns to Gregory currently perfectly, right? Like, I think the mimic is the one behind the post-it notes room, and he was doing all that learning to communicate, and it's not supposed to be a representation of the Afton family, but rather the concept of wanting a family, you know, that kind of thing. But whatever, who cares? Who cares? I do think that the holes he brings up soften a bit of the blow of this theory, because he acknowledges that it's not perfect. And then at the end of the video, he basically perfectly explains the problem with Security Breach's story and all that, which honestly I kind of feel applies a little bit to Help Wanted and a lot of the Fazbear Frights stories and everything. Like a bunch of clues that go in a lot of different directions, and like what does it mean? It tries to do so many things that there's no point even trying to solve it because it's not fun anymore, you know? C tier. FNAF stumped me again. I do think that the idea of there being a secret canceled ARG is kind of interesting. I don't think he provides enough evidence that it was ever actually real. And knowing what happened afterwards, yeah, I can't in good conscience place it anywhere higher than a D tier. And also, in case you're wondering, I don't think there's any F tiers. This one would have been the sole F tier theory. But again, I do think that there is an interesting little hook there. That's just me, though. The final Security Breach mystery solved. This is easily the best Security Breach theory. It's not even close. I think that the explanation of the Blob is pretty compelling, and it highlights what I think is the strongest aspect of the Steel Wool narrative, something that I actually like, which is this overall theme of these characters, their physical characters, have moved on. They found rest, or in the case of Golden Freddy and Afton, just eternal torment and whatnot. But everyone else, they found peace. But the feelings that they left behind and their impact on the world, it's still there, right? And the Blob being just the manifestation of all that is pretty cool. And I think that they absolutely should have leaned into that more. You lean into Vanny, who's kind of the new Afton, right? Because of the impact that Glitchtrap had, right? If you got rid of Glitchtrap after Help Wanted and it was just Vanny, that would be so thematically cohesive with what the Blob is trying to do. And I think he makes a compelling case that this absolutely is what the point of the Blob is. And I just wish that the story overall leaned into this aspect more. As it stands, it's pretty good, and it, it livens up what I think is otherwise a really not great story. Don't know why I said it like that. Afton's Last Stand. Continuing the Fazbear Frights tradition, this one is mid. There's no additional evidence to prove that Gregory is a robot, or that Glamrock Freddy is possessed by Michael Afton, or anyone like that. Like, okay, if Gregory is patient 46, and he's a good hacker and whatnot, then couldn't he have just sent a bunch of code, like discrete code, to overload his system instead of it being like a spirit or whatever? Like, that's an equally valid solution, whatever the flipping word is. I'm tired, man. Yeah. Now again, the idea that whatever robot is from the post-it room is built from old staff bots. But then again, he ties it into Gregory, and I just don't really think that there's enough compelling evidence to definitively say that Gregory is a robot. I do feel like he brings up enough to where it's kind of a, 50-50, right? Either way, either side could be right. But yeah, as it stands, another D tier. Golden Freddy never existed. This one right here is the epitome of either the story is really stupid or the theory is stupid. It can't go either way, right? So either the first 4 games absolutely 100% happen in real life, which makes the theory bad, or the first 4 games are games within the universe, which then begs the question of why they used these games and put it in VR to undo their bad PR. That's bad. That's just, I hate that as a story beat. And he does admit that he hates the theory, just like I hate the theory. I think it makes the story kind of lame. I think the fact that he kind of says that he doesn't like it or whatever, and he's just kind of following the thread, saves it from a D tier and slaps it in a C tier. You're going to hate this. This one is an interesting theory, but it doesn't really feel like it has that big of an impact on the series as a whole. I don't really have much to say about this one. Another C tier. FNAF, the origins of evil. It's kind of weird that he uses all this evidence to try and, figure out what Afton's motive was. And then if you actually read Silver Eyes, it just gives literally the exact same motivation for him. But whatever, who cares? I think it's a solid theory with enough backing behind it. So yeah, it's a B tier. Also, the thumbnail is really weird because it has nothing to do with the actual theory, but whatever. The ultimate timeline. All right, here we go. We got a 4-parter here, baby. So I don't really have a ton to say about the first 3 parts, but what I shall say is that it's a pretty epic. I think that the logic that he uses is solid. I also like the presentation of everything. It's a pretty nice change of pace, just kind of going for, a general narrative, like a little mini novella kind of deal. And then explaining the bigger decisions that he made and why he came to those conclusions and whatnot. And honestly, that's kind of the same thoughts that I have for all of the first 3. So yeah, A tier, A tier, A tier. And then obviously we're going to get to Security Breach in just a second. Although I will say that I haven't brought it up yet, but they really, really like to play Bellora's song, dude. It shows up all the time, bro, and it's never just a little snippet. It's like the whole thing. It gets old, and by this point I reached my breaking point, and I sobbed a little, I'm not gonna lie. But then we get to a part 4, a family rebuilt. So this is the section that deals with the worst part of the story. So it was always going to be a little below everything else. And I do like how he points out early on that there are too many ideas going in too many directions, but that doesn't mean that I agree with his conclusions. Doubling down on Gregory being a robot and Michael Afton possessing Glamrock Freddy, once again with little to no new evidence, with the hindsight of Ruin especially pushing back on that idea. It's pretty cringe. So yeah, and then of course there's the first 3 games, which, contradicts the story he brings up, which it was 4 games, and then later on, he's actually going to go back and say, oh, it's 6 games, and, how many games are actually games within the universe and how many aren't? It always changes, and it's never consistent, which is why I still don't really buy into that whole idea. Honestly, though, it's really not that bad, and the other 3 are solid enough to prevent it from being anything lower than a B tier. So, yeah. I solved Ruin. So the mimic stuff is spot on, which you would expect, given that Tales from the Pizzaplex explicitly makes it like very obvious that yes, the mimic is going to be in Ruin. But yeah, this one's generally better than a lot of the other Fazbear Frights, Tales of the Pleasaplex stuff, as it feels like it ties into the game a lot more than previously. With that said, it's still a C tier because I don't really have much to say about it. FNAF: The AI Uprising. This is a solid thematic look at Five Nights at Freddy's. It's pretty much a better version of the previous theory, and I don't have much else to say about it other than B tier. FNAF: Buried and Forgotten. There's not enough evidence connecting the costumes he brings up with the costumes mentioned in FNAF 3 Night 4, especially since the mediocre melodies make a lot more sense for that, but whatever. This is a fine enough look at Ruin, but there's really not much else to it. I'm gonna slam it in B tier. Bonnie's Haunted Past. I think this one's pretty interesting, and I like how creative it is with the Bonnie mask kid from FNAF 4 being Cassie's father. It's a bit of a leap, but I don't know, I think it's kind of fun, and I like it. It's pretty cool. So I'm gonna put it in A tier. I solved the FNAF movie. So starting the theory by saying that the movie is not going to have a happy ending is pretty funny, given that it literally does have a happy ending. Anyway, this is the most accurate prediction he ever had, like full stop, period. However, he didn't actually write this one because he had the whole script. So, who cares, man? Who cares? I think it's a solid lil theory, so I'm gonna slap it in B tier, baby. Why you hate my theories. So this is the lowest viewed FNAF theory on the channel. And I'm talking specifically like the MatPat stuff. So yeah, this one goes in the real world. Once again, I do think he makes some good points, right? The double standards and how, just how frustrating talking about the series had become up to this point and kind of still is. And honestly, I can't help but draw certain parallels between this and honestly a lot of the Zelda stuff, right? Like the mere audacity of someone to have a different opinion resulting in this level of vitriol is ridiculous, and it's kind of sad that it's happening across multiple franchises. And I don't know, I think he makes a lot of fair points and calls them out correctly. However, I will say that it is cope. It's justified cope, but cope nonetheless. My secret's out. I'm in the FNAF movie. Yeah, real world. This is just a nice little look into the experience of getting to be a part of the movie, even if only for a cameo. The FNAF movie just changed the lore. I don't really have much to say about them. One thing that's really nice about this one is that it isn't bogged down by all this, just the crushing weight of the lore. It's just a nice breather. It's like very, it's a really lovely refresher after everything, B tier. Help me solve the impossible. It's kind of hard to rank it as an actual theory because like this stumps him way more, right? There aren't even really any leads. It's all just, here's a little puzzle I couldn't solve. Here's another one I couldn't solve, and here's how I tried to solve it and how I failed and what does it all mean? And he doesn't really come to many conclusions. And honestly, I don't actually know if these have been solved or anything, because I'm gonna be real with you. MatPat is like 90% of my look into the theories and whatnot and ideas behind this game, this series, the games. Dude, my brain's dying and my throat is also dying because I've been recording for like an hour and a half now, so that's epic. But yeah, I'm gonna put it in B tier because the other one's in B tier. FNAF: A Fragmented Memory. So this is the only Help Wanted 2 theory he would do. This is the first game since the second entry that he would only do one video for a game. So that's kind of interesting, There's also the last lore-based theory that would go on game theory. And I think it's pretty solid. His explanation of why, the two endings are canon and going into everything, how it leads to ruin and how Vanny is free and all that. I think it's solid, right? Definitely deserving it of an A tier. I'm glad that the last proper lore-based theory did go out on a good note. I know how the movie trilogy ends. This right here is the lowest viewed theory in general, so that's kind of interesting. You know, and it's also kind of funny that he is squeezing in one last X character is a robot theory before, stepping down. But overall, I think it is a solid theory, and it is by far the most compelling theory that X character is robot. You know, because there is a lot of weird stuff in the book that does indicate that. So honestly, I'd have to agree with him on this one. And I think that it makes the most narrative sense. I'm glad that the last one of these kinds is also very solid. But that's really the most interesting part of the theory. Everything else is just kind of eh. And finally, we come to FNAF. Thanks for the memories. This is a really sweet retrospective of the legacy of FNAF and, you know, its impact on not just games, but on, you know, all sorts of different media, movies, and YouTube, and all that stuff, and all the good it's done in the world, and how it was all from Scott just not giving up. And I think that's, I don't know, it's pretty wholesome. I also really like how it ties into his last game theory that was on, you know, Game Theory. Those two are really good companion pieces to each other. So I don't think that I would get too much flack for putting this one in S tier. I think it's a really, really solid conclusion to his arc. So yeah, there it is, the completed tier list. Overall, I think it's fairly solid, you know. Got a nice little bell curve there, kind of hard to see because there's 4 on B tier that are just kind of, you know. But yeah, I think it's, I'm kind of surprised at how solid a lot of these were, you know. Like the C and D tier stuff, I don't really care for. But, you know, B and above is stuff that I actually like. Not necessarily stuff that I agree with or think is accurate, but just, you know, kind of fun ones. So overall, what's the lesson? What's the takeaway from this? Don't spend 2 weeks straight watching nothing but MatPat. I don't like his voice anymore. I'm tired of the FNAF brain rot. In all seriousness, it was really nostalgic to go through this and to kind of see the evolution of how different ideas ebbed and flowed. And I hope that MatPat finds fulfillment in his life moving forward, and that he did finally get all of the answers from Scott Cawthon, as he was waiting for a good 9.5 years. So thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Goodbye, everyone.